about a sermon for today, I was struck by the juxtaposition of ideas between I vow to be my country and today's gospel. We've just sung about the love that asks no questions. And poor Thomas has so long been vilified for asking questions about that first post-resurrection appearance in an upper room. I vow to be is a beautiful hymn, absolutely of its time. The original poem was written sometime between 1908 and 1912, a very different world. But it's also timeless, thanks largely to Holt's wonderful music. I've sung it at weddings, I've sung it at funerals, but mainly I've sung it at military events, where it seems to encapsulate that sense of honour and service which mark our servicemen and women at their best. And it reminds me that sometimes we have to act without question and do what has to be done. Although, in my admittedly limited experience, it can sometimes be less about not asking questions than about asking them and then doing the job anyway. I'm not very good at not asking questions, as Richard will tell you. It made me a pretty rubbish Navy wife until it was explained to me that if officers were meant to have families, they'd have been issued with them. I don't believe that asking questions is of itself enough to fail the test of love. Sometimes asking questions is the loving thing to do, especially if we think that someone may be doing or about to do the wrong thing. If you're a parent or a carer, you know only too well how many of the questions which spring from loving hearts are not well received either by our teens or our elderly parents. And if we're ever required to give what we call tough love, well, that can lead to some very difficult questions indeed. Archbishop Justin asked some questions in his sermon last Sunday. I know you'll all have your own views on that. But I hope the one thing we can agree on is that living in a country which celebrates the idea that politicians are paid to oppose, I think it was Disraeli who said, it is the duty of the opposition to oppose. And everyone has the right to ask difficult questions of our leaders, is something to be grateful for. In the more than 100 years since the poem was first written, we're still seeing where the demand for unthinking obedience might lead. And I think both churches and governments may have regretted keeping silent as often as they have regretted speaking out. If we do accept that the best kind of love is one that asks no questions, then of course Thomas, who probably had a lot more to say on that first Easter Sunday than is recorded here, probably deserves to be condemned for his failure to respond immediately with joy and relief to the news Jesus is alive. But you won't be surprised, especially if you heard my sermon last Sunday, to hear that I don't agree. It is the doubt and actually the lack of joy in the latter-day Gospels, which convinces me of their truth. Doubt was and is human. We hear all the time people, including ourselves, responding even to good news with incredulity. Yet nobody refers to doubting Peter or doubting Cleopas. And Cleopas walked for miles alongside Jesus, asking questions and receiving answers, before the penny dropped when they finally shared that meal in Emmaus. So why is it only Thomas that gets the bad reputation? Personally, I blame the other disciples. Jesus himself responded with compassion. He took Thomas's concerns seriously. He came back just for him because he understood that Thomas's questions came from a place of love. And no one who reads John's Gospel can possibly doubt that Thomas loved Jesus. What he wanted from those other disciples was evidence. And I don't think that's unreasonable, and certainly not sinful. God created us thoughtful, intelligent, inquiring human beings. And I think he expects us to ask questions. After all, Jesus asked questions all the time. It was how he taught people to think about God and their relationship with him, and how he tried to get the authorities to think about whether they were actually helping people to develop those relationships, or just getting in the way. That's why it's often argued that the opposite of faith is not doubt, but certainty. That is the conviction that we know what God is up to, and our unwillingness to consider that God might have different ideas. In the same way, you can argue that the opposite of love is not questioning, but indifference, not caring enough to want to know more. And I can't forget, of course, that it is only through asking questions that we get the answers we need. Again, we have Thomas to thank for that, but that's another sermon. For today, I'd like to remind you of George Herbert's poem, Love Bade Me Welcome, which I keep hoping one day we might teach you to sing. Preferably Paul Williams, but other versions are, of course, available. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, you shall be he. I, the unkind, the ungrateful. Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand, and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I have marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? My dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. Here, in this conversation between God and us, It is the questions asked by both parties which lead to blessing and forgiveness, to being made welcome at the Lord's table and in the Lord's house. So trust in God. Trust in Thomas. Ask your question.